Keith Porter thought he'd found exactly what he'd been missing. Not just a relationship, not just attention, but escape. From divorce, from routine, from the silence waiting for him every night back in Bristol. And under the neon glow of Pattaya's beach road, it genuinely felt possible. Until the woman he proposed to turned out to be living a second life he knew absolutely nothing about. And by the time he discovered the truth, he'd already burned through most of his savings trying to hold on to a fantasy that was collapsing in real time. Welcome to Passport Romance Stories. Tonight's story isn't just about romance, it's about momentum. Because sometimes people don't fall in love all at once. They slide into it, decision by decision, payment by payment, lie by lie, until reality becomes too expensive to face. And Keith didn't realise he was trapped until the proposal ring was already on her finger. Keith was 48, recently divorced, working logistics for a construction company outside Bristol. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic. The kind of man who spent 20 years doing what he was supposed to do, only to wake up one morning realising he didn't recognise his own life anymore. His marriage ended quietly, no screaming, no affair, just distance. After the divorce, things got smaller. Smaller apartment, smaller social circle. Then, one night on YouTube, Pattaya appeared in his feed. Beach bars, night markets, smiling women, cheap apartments overlooking the ocean. And for the first time in years, Keith became obsessed with the idea of starting over. 6 months later, he booked the flight. At first, Pattaya felt exactly like the fantasy he'd built in his head. Warm air, busy streets, music everywhere, girls talking to him like he mattered. And then he met Dara in McDonald's, of all places. She was 29, soft-spoken, funny, not overly aggressive like some of the women calling tourists into bars. That was partly what hooked him. She seemed different. The first night she barely flirted, mostly just asked questions about England, his family, why he came to Thailand alone. Keith noticed she kept checking her phone, sometimes disappearing for several minutes at a time. But when she came back, she always smiled like she was genuinely happy to see him. That was enough. Over the next week, they saw each other almost every day. Coffee in the mornings, street food at night, beach walks after midnight. And Keith started making dangerous assumptions. Because when someone gives you attention during the loneliest period of your life, your brain fills in the blanks for you. He told himself she wasn't like the others, even though there were signs. Small ones. Dara almost never let him visit her apartment. She avoided certain streets at night. Sometimes she vanished for hours with vague excuses about family problems or helping a friend. Once, Keith asked why she was always awake at 4 o'clock in the morning. She laughed it off. Thailand sleep different, she joked, and he accepted that answer because he wanted to. That's the part people don't understand later. Victims don't ignore red flags because they're stupid. They ignore them because the truth threatens something they desperately need to believe. 3 weeks into the trip, Keith extended his stay, then extended it again. His friends back at home started noticing changes. He stopped answering messages, stopped joining work calls on time, started talking about never returning to England. One friend asked him directly, "Mate, are you sure this is real?" Keith got defensive immediately, because deep down, part of him already knew things weren't adding up. But by then, he'd emotionally committed. And emotional commitment makes people irrational, especially in Pattaya, especially when loneliness finally feels cured. One evening, Dara took him to Beach Road during sunset. The city looked almost unreal. Orange sky, music drifting from nearby bars, tourists laughing near the water. And Keith made the biggest decision of his life in under 30 seconds. He proposed right there on the beachfront. No family, no planning, no hesitation, just adrenaline. Dara looked shocked at first, then emotional, then overwhelmed. And when she finally said yes, Keith felt like he'd won his life back. What he didn't realise was that Dara had gone completely silent afterwards. Not excited, not celebratory, quiet, like someone calculating consequences. That night, Keith noticed something strange. Her phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Message after message after message. She kept flipping the screen over before he could see it. Then she suddenly announced she needed to meet a cousin for an hour. Keith argued for the first time. Not aggressively, just confused. "You disappear a lot." She got defensive instantly. "You don't trust me?" That question hit him harder than it should have, because manipulative relationships often work like that. They make suspicion feel like betrayal. So Keith backed down again, but now the cracks were visible. The next few days became messy. Arguments, distance, disappearing acts. Then came the money. It started small. Rent problems, medical bill for her mother, scooter repairs. Keith hesitated sometimes, but every hesitation triggered emotional pressure. "You think I use you. You don't love me anymore. You promise we build future together." And because he'd already proposed, every payment now felt connected to protecting the relationship. That's how escalation works. Not through force, through emotional investment. Keith started transferring money weekly, then daily. He even dipped into retirement savings after she claimed she wanted to quit nightlife work permanently and open a cafe. That word should have stopped him, nightlife, because until then she had never clearly explained what she actually did for work. Only vague answers. Hospitality, entertainment, customer service. Keith didn't push harder because he was afraid of what he might hear. Then the illusion collapsed completely. It happened by accident. Keith was walking near Walking Street late one night after they'd argued earlier. He saw Dara across the street. Different clothes, heavy makeup, laughing with two older tourists outside a bar. At first he thought maybe it wasn't her. Then she kissed one of them on the cheek, and everything inside him froze. Keith didn't confront her immediately. He followed, half in denial, half hoping there was some explanation. Then he watched her walk into the bar and disappear behind a curtain with one of the men. That was the moment fantasy collided with reality, and Keith later admitted something horrifying. Part of him still tried to rationalise it. Maybe she was forced, maybe it was old work, maybe she was just entertaining customers. That's how deep emotional dependency had become. When Dara finally returned to the apartment hours later, Keith exploded. She cried immediately, not angry, not defensive, crying. And that completely destabilised him, because now the story changed again. She admitted she worked in nightlife, but claimed she only did it to support her family. She insisted she still loved Keith, insisted she wanted out, insisted the proposal changed everything. And somehow, against all logic, Keith stayed. That's what people misunderstand about these situations. The revelation rarely ends the relationship immediately. Usually it deepens the trap, because now the victim feels responsible for saving the person. That's when Keith's finances truly collapsed. The requests became constant. Bar debts, family emergencies, lost income from quitting work, visa plans, apartment deposits. Every problem became Keith's responsibility, and when he slowed payments down, the pressure intensified. Dara became cold, distant, sometimes disappearing for days, then returning affectionate again once money arrived. Reward, withdrawal, reward again. Classic conditioning. Keith lost nearly £30,000 in under 5 months. Credit cards, loans, savings, gone. And the worst part, even after discovering the truth, he still wanted the fantasy back, because by then it wasn't just about love anymore, it was about ego, about proving he wasn't another lonely tourist being played. One night, Keith finally snapped. He demanded passwords, answers, transparency. Dara refused. The argument exploded publicly outside the condo, and that's when another man appeared. Calm, confident, protective. Not a boyfriend exactly, more like management. He told Keith something that finally shattered the illusion completely. You are not her only sponsor. Sponsor, not fiancé, sponsor. One word destroyed the entire fantasy structure Keith had built around his life. And suddenly, every missing hour, every hidden phone call, every emotional shift made sense. Keith booked a flight home 3 days later, alone. By then, his bank account was nearly empty. But according to Keith, the financial loss wasn't even the worst part. It was the humiliation, the realization that he ignored every instinct because he needed the fantasy to be real more than he wanted the truth. And honestly, that's what makes stories like this dangerous, because the trap isn't always greed. Sometimes it's loneliness, sometimes it's hope, sometimes it's finally feeling wanted after years of feeling invisible. And cities built around fantasy understand that better than anyone. We'd like to thank the viewer who shared this story, because stories like these matter. Not to shame people, but to expose how emotional dependency, isolation and fantasy can slowly override judgment, especially when someone is vulnerable enough to believe they finally found happiness. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you subscribe to Passport Romance Stories, and remember, the most dangerous scams don't begin with fear, they begin with attention.